Hello and welcome to this episode of the Northwood podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones. Now, usually I spend this time before we really dive in plugging our church, our producers, and even our own podcast. So if you've listened to the Northwood podcast even a handful of times, then you probably could script out what's coming next for me. Except, surprise, not today. Of course, you should check out the All Indiana Podcast Network, who produces this podcast. You can find those podcasts at www.wishtv.com/podcast or our church at www.indYncc.org. That's indncc.org. Check those things out, sure. But for now, I'd like to mention a series of talks that just happened at our church these past 2 weeks. We invited a guest, Dr. Richard Hamm, to come and speak to us about the sweeping societal changes that we've undergone these past, well, we'll say 70-ish years. And Dr. Hamm was the perfect person for this because he's been a leader in our denomination, the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ, for many decades. And to say he's been a leader is putting it mildly. He was the general minister and president. He ran the whole thing for about a decade. For 10 years, and I guess exactly a decade. So he has a broad and deep understanding of the church broadly and our church denomination specifically, and the life and the cultural currents that impact it. So we asked him to our church to speak about the societal changes we've undergone these past decades and the impact that these changes have had on our culture, our institutions, not just churches, but all of our institutions, but also our churches in specific. His talks were called Generational Change and the Future of the Church. So he spoke to that title. And so basically to sum it up very quickly, which I can't do, so please watch the lectures, but mainline churches, ours being one of them, have been in decline from their 1955 station, where they were back when, in the 50s. And it's been going this way for a long while now. So in his talks, Dr. Hamm helped us come to terms with what has happened in hopes that churches like ours can navigate these seeming troubled waters. I say seeming troubled because we see great potential and hope, actually, in some of the cultural currents that are going on. So if this sounds like something that you're interested in, I've posted the video recordings of both talks to my own YouTube channel, the same one that I post the video version of these recordings on. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're already there. Just find the video below this one, or the two videos below this one, or two of them. But I'll also include links to them in this podcast episode's description, as well as in the description of the YouTube video. Does that make sense? And if not, if you have trouble finding them, just reach out to me. My email is Heath, Heath, that's my name, at indncc.org. That's Heath at indYncc.org. You can reach out to me for any reason, really. But if you'd like me to send you the links to these talks about the church and its possible futures, please reach out. And moving on. Here in a moment, we'll be considering a passage found in the Bible, per usual, from the Gospel of Matthew in this instance. But first, we need to pause for an ad break for our podcast audience. So we'll see you back in a moment. And we're back. As I was saying, the passage we'll be going over is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. That's Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. And they read, "Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" To put these verses into perspective, you should read what comes just before this text. Leading up to this moment, Jesus has been on a healing tour of sorts. He's been traveling across the countryside, sometimes crossing over the lake and then back, doing all that he can to restore the lives of others. And what can Jesus do? Jesus, he can do quite a lot. You've read the story probably by now, or you've heard tales about what he did when he was alive. If you were to read what comes just before today's passage, you would have read an account of Jesus cleansing a man of his skin disease, then of him healing the servant of a Roman soldier, and then one of his disciples, Peter's to be specific, his mother-in-law, who was lying in bed with a fever. And so upon witnessing this last healing that I just mentioned, many others came in to be healed. And in that story specifically, in Matthew chapter 8, one is left with the impression that Jesus has spent the rest of that day healing as quickly as he can the infirm that were brought to him. The text reads that in the end, he cured all who were sick. It's the back half of verse 16 of chapter 8. And the quote-unquote all who were sick is probably meant to represent to us a few hundred people living in a small town. So still, not bad for a day's work, more than I've ever done. And then he moves on from there into a boat. The boat is swamped by a storm, but then he calms the storm. And Jesus' disciples at that moment are amazed at his ability to bring a calm to the chaos of their lives. And then he got out of the boat and started healing again and ministering to desperate people. And he supplies what they need. The people leave these encounters with Jesus profoundly changed and fulfilled. Next, just to go through, it's too much to take in. Next, he dines with disreputable thieves and then agrees to help them change their ways. You get the picture. I'm trying to paint a picture here of a man who is doing all that they can. And, hey, it's Jesus here. So as I said earlier, he can do a lot. He can do the very most, in fact, which is encouraging to know someone out there is doing the very most. And if Jesus keeps on like this, the whole world is going to be restored come next spring. At least that's the impression I get from reading the Gospels. You get a picture here of someone who's on a healing tear that seemingly cannot be stopped until, quoting from the text today, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." So Jesus, plucking right along, comes to a moment where he looks out at the work still in store for him, the work still left to be done after he has already done more than any of us could do. And he says, I'm going to need some help. I was reminded of that moment, not to be too irreverent, but that moment in the movie Jaws where Sheriff Brody says, after seeing the larger-than-life monstrous shark that they're hunting, when he sees that shark for the first time, appreciates the task at hand. Once beholding the shark, he says to the other two, "You're going to need a bigger boat." Or in this case, maybe we might say, Jesus, you're going to need a bigger church, a larger help, a pool of helpers to draw from. Maybe a much larger church. Even Jesus, it seems, couldn't go it alone. Do you know the feeling? I've experienced it many times in my ministry. The sense that the work is too huge, the labor too exhaustive, the numbers of hurting people too numerous to count, the problems too complex, at least for me, you and me both probably. And sometimes it feels as if there simply isn't enough help. We do the work, Jesus, we might say to ourselves. We do the work, Jesus, but we are just too tired, drained of ideas, and so lonely sometimes in the work. And we're not the first disciples of Jesus to feel this way. The disciples in Jesus' time turned to Jesus more than once and questioned whether or not he was misguided in his mission. As I said, I've felt that way too many times in my ministry to even name or count here, that the harvest was too plentiful, but the laborers too few. So what to do? we felt that way, my wife and I, several years ago at our last church. It's in a small town near central Indiana, one of those towns where the economy has been severely impacted in a negative sense as more and more high-paying jobs have moved out of the area. Industrial blight, the Rust Belt as they call it, poverty sets in. Consequently, there were a lot of young people in that town wandering around, still are probably, wandering around that town with very little to do. And my wife Kelly and I were very concerned about the youth in that town, and we saw them on a daily basis, full of life, but in need of direction. But we were only two people who didn't have the full skill set of, say, a Jesus. But we tried to help as best we could. I remember we helped more than one pregnant teenager with support. We tried to provide activities at our church for the young people to fill in those gaps in the day when they might get into trouble otherwise. We ran ourselves ragged trying to do a whole lot, but it was all too much, too overwhelming. Too many young people in need. The harvest, plentiful, but the laborers, not enough help, or so it seemed at the time. Well, there was me and there was Kelly, but no one else, or so we thought. For us in our last town, it worked like this. We were feeling overwhelmed at the problem. We had our harvest plentiful, laborers too few moment more than once. And we were, in our own way, crying out to God for help with the work that we were feeling compelled to engage. We couldn't avoid this compulsion to help. We felt that was what we were supposed to do, but too much. So what do? Felt stuck. But just when we were feeling most overwhelmed, we were approached by a couple in that town who, unbeknownst to us, had that same passion for a long time. A passion to offer young people in that town some direction, support, and something positive to do in their own downtime. So now, at that moment, we found there were 4 of us. Now, still, this is a small number, but then we weren't feeling so alone or so isolated in our problems. Then, the 4 of us sent out the bat signal, or more accurately, we scheduled a meeting. And we invited people from all over town, from the churches that were there, from the town council, from the American Legion, Lions Club, anyone we could think of to ask, really. We didn't know if people would come, but we just wanted to find out. And, people came. In fact, we had to put up extra chairs in the room. Everyone from the town's council was there, representatives from other churches, community members with no affiliation whatsoever, but just a desire to help, which is enough. But by the time that meeting concluded, we had the beginning organizational structure that would become that town's youth center. And it grew from there. The town itself purchased a building for us and leased it to us for $1 a year. We raised the funds to remodel that building, which was at that time quite dilapidated, so much so that I once fell through the roof. At least my foot did. But either way, it grew from there. Our volunteer base grew, resources came, and eventually we could pay a director to take charge. And the work, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. The work remained hard. And we had many ups and downs, and I'm sure they've had many ups and downs since we left that town some years ago. But the last I checked, they were still going. For me personally, what we learned was that true. The harvest is always plentiful. There's more work to be done outdoors than you could possibly do in a lifetime. In fact, there is not an end to the work that needs doing. But there are many others besides you, besides me, out there who feel just as you do or I do about the world, who are willing to help in the work if only they could find others whose hearts beat the same. So just as we, my wife and I, sometimes feel overwhelmed and left alone to face the world's problems, we found out in that moment that we were called to do this work by God, but not alone. We were called together, the 2 of us, but then with many, dozens and dozens, and hundreds of others besides. And we may have felt like we needed a bigger church, but the church that we were, humble and small in size, we found was enough to meet the needs of the moment. at least many more of those needs than we could have met if we had continued to try to do it alone. So back to our story. I mean, what you've got to do is just read on past that part where Jesus bemoans or seems to bemoan the lack of willing helpers along the way. We concluded at the end of chapter 9. And if we'd stopped there, we'd have Jesus' lament at not having enough help, and that'd be it. But as I was saying, turn on to chapter 10. Turn the page, and what you find is that Jesus next gathers his friends together. So you see, he's not alone. And he wasn't alone before, and now he has a greater sense of their presence with him. And then he calls them to do the same work. Calls others to the cause, others with a similar desire to see the realm of God come near. And he had already called the disciples, and they may not have realized it, but he was equipping them to do the work. And so by the time they were done walking with Jesus, they discovered that they too could do the work. So at the end of the day, Jesus does not have to bemoan the lack of laborers so that he can slide into some form of pessimistic apathy. I mean, that's what you or I might do. I mean, that's what I, in fact, sometimes do. You or I might, in Jesus' circumstance, have said to ourselves, well, the problems are just too large. I guess there isn't anything to be done about it. And so we absolve ourselves of the need to do anything about it. At least I'm sometimes driven to similar moods of apathy. But Jesus didn't say that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few, so let's throw in the towel. Instead, he says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few, so let's ask the God of all of this to send us some help. And then Jesus looks up to find that he is surrounded by the only help he needs. He then sent the disciples out to do the same work. Read through chapter 10 and on into chapter 11 of what follows. And some of us are still plucking away at the work today. But the harvest is plentiful. The laborers are few. And many times we stop right there. But if we read on, it goes, verse 38, therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Which begs the question, can we trust in God to keep this promise, to send us the help we need to meet the challenges we face? I think so. I hope so. At least I put my trust in a God who will follow through and not leave us high and dry. So church, remember, there is help out there. Many hearts that beat as ours. We've just got to make those connections. And we should trust in God's Spirit to lead the way. Trust in the Spirit to lead the way, which is what I believe is happening. Since my family arrived in Indianapolis over 5 years ago, we've met many people who feel as we do about the world, its problems, and the work the Church of Jesus needs to engage in. We can agree on many of those things, and we've met many of them. And some of you have started coming to our church, to Northwood Christian Church. And work towards feeding the hungry began here a long time ago and has been carried on for many, many years by way of our food pantry and its loyal and faithful servants. The work they do is I am so proud of the work they do. But the poverty that gives rise to hunger is all around us and far too wide in scope for us to reasonably deal with on our own. And this doesn't seem to be ready to change anytime soon. So we still need more help. How if there were others? And it turns out there are many, many, many of us. Others who want to change the world in the same ways Jesus did, but who are unaware that we are also here wanting to do those same things. Others siloed off, maybe not far away, wanting the same things, and here we are. Well, just a few weeks ago, Kelly, my wife, and I met with someone who leases space in our building here at Northwood, and they wanted to meet with us to share a vision that they had for our building and the way we might use this space. And Their vision was so closely aligned with our own values and vision that it felt like God was answering that prayer that I was told to pray right there, right then, a prayer for help with the work. And this person has been in our building working just yards away from my own office, feeling the need to minister to the needs of their community. Same as me, sitting yards away, feeling the need to minister to the needs of my community. So it turns out some of her community is my own. We not only occupy the same neighborhoods, same workspaces, drive through the same streets, but our kids even go to the same school. So now here's another laborer helping us along the way as we help them. We help each other. It's a two-way street. And not tit for tat, but reciprocal love. This is but one example I can give you. And I've spoken with neighbors, other community leaders, and even other pastors. And all of us have a sense that not only is the harvest plentiful, in other words, there is positive change that is right there, seemingly just out of reach, but that we laborers might not actually be as few as we had previously thought. We just need to get our heads together to join in the work together. And work to do what? What exactly? We didn't know exactly what to do about the problems facing our youth in that last town, the story I was just telling you. It wasn't until our heads came together that the Holy Spirit inspired us with the vision. In fact, it was at that first meeting when the term holy imagination, began to become especially meaningful to me. I don't remember where I first heard it, but my paraphrase, a holy imagination describes the ways that God's Spirit may inspire in us ideas that we could not think of on our own. Holy imagination. And I tried to have this experience all on my own. I still try to have this experience all on my own with varying degrees of success, usually not successful. And it wasn't until we were in a group, though, in that town, talking about what we hoped to see in clear terms that we finally began to have some traction. And this process took some time, and we needed to engage it together with more voices, more heads, thinking along with us. And it took a couple of years before we could open, but this was only possible because we laborers answered the call of God and found that we were called together along with others by that one voice, that one vision, and we discovered that God really does send us the help that we need. So what now? If this message has inspired you, reach out, make a connection. If not a connection to us in Northwood, although that would be great, a connection to some group or community that is fighting the good fight. And they are out there, perhaps along an issue of importance, fighting the good fight along an issue of importance to you. And I'll assume that this would also be an issue of importance to Jesus. Of course, it would be if your issue is to address many of those same pressing issues, poverty, bigotry, injustice at every level. These things Jesus worked against. You may even add newer issues to the list, ones that we may imagine Jesus would also get behind. For example, care for God's creation. Many today join with Jesus in this difficult work. So if this describes you, reach out. It would be great to hear from you, or find a community that can help you along the way if you're feeling isolated in the work, or if you're not, invite others in to that community. Now is really a good time for us, though, to come and ask us about this, because we are embarking on our own plans for the future of our church here at Northwood Christian Church. The voices that join in around us in this time in history will inform and shape our vision as it comes into clearer focus to us all. So perhaps our holy imaginations will combine to think of ideas that we could never have thought of on our own when you come along. Or perhaps you, the listener, and I will look back on these times as the moment in history where God answered that prayer yet again. The prayer for help as we continue to fight these good fights, but not in isolation, but together. And maybe that means we fight together for justice and in the name of love. So how about it? Sound like something you're interested in? Well, maybe come to church. or find some other community of support. But finally, I guess what I want to say in the end is don't give up. If you are tired, worn weary by this world and all its problems, the harvest too large, laborers too few, please take care of yourself first. Please, I'll say it again, take care of yourself. You can't do everything all at once, and sometimes you need to take care of yourself. But as soon as you feel able, join in the work of Jesus. And what you'll discover there is that you are not truly alone. Help is on the way and finds us. In fact, help is likely just under your nose because you are not alone. As we've been talking, you have come to see that many others wish to see the change you wish to see. We just need to find each other and find a focus. It was this way with Jesus. He found the help, or help found him. Providence is a sticky wicket. But either way, when Jesus left, his disciples continued to find help, calling others to the work just as they'd been called. And now, here we are. And God is faithful. Help is on the way, very likely embodied by the likes of you, me, and whoever else may answer this call. So hold on. Keep your head up. Don't give up. The God who called us to this moment will see us through to the next. And the harvest is plentiful. So it's a good thing there are many others, even besides us, who are willing to join in this labor of love.